Good afternoon. Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members of 2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me. When I put my hand on the Bible and took the oath of office 22 months ago, I knew this job would be hard. But I'll be honest, I never could have imagined anything like this. I want to start by saying thank you to our law enforcement. Thank you to the fearless FBI agents. And thank you to the brave Michigan State police troopers who participated in this operation, acting under the leadership of Colonel Joe Gasper. I also want to thank Attorney General Nessel and the U.S. Attorneys Burge and Schneider and their teams for pursuing criminal charges that hopefully will lead to convictions, bringing these sick and depraved men to justice. As a mom with 2 teenage daughters and 3 stepsons, my husband and I are eternally grateful to everyone who put themselves in harm's way to keep our family safe.
Hi, welcome to the Law&Crime Report. I am Bob Bianchi. I'll be your host today. Dramatic developments. There were 6 men that were arrested in that plot. And you may remember, because Law&Crime Network covers this gavel to gavel like we do all stories, that the defense lawyer for one of those individuals charged said, this is just bawdy talk. They say some things. They didn't really mean it. You guys are all misinterpreting it. First Amendment, well, major development. Let me make sure I get this right. Gerbin, 25 years old, has just pled guilty in federal court to conspiracy charges. And the icing on top of the case for prosecutors is that he is agreeing to fully cooperate with law enforcement officers with respect to the other defendants in the case, including the fact that he and they had a house that was built to model the governor's house and it was called a shoot house. And they were actually in operational plans in order to be able to kidnap her from her vacation home. He gave full chapter and verse as to who was involved, what the plans were, what people did, electronic data that also supported confidential information and cooperating witnesses. Let's get right to it, because this is going to be a major development in this major case, because we are talking about the kidnapping and potential assassination of government officials. I don't care where you are on the spectrum, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, it just can't be in a country that follows the rule of law. Let's go to Lisa Lockwood, soldier turned undercover narc and SWAT team member, the United States Air Force with a tour of duty in Operation Desert Storm, an undercover narcotics detective, a crime analyst, and she wrote the book, Act As If, and it basically talks to you about how to achieve, and she does a lot of consulting in that regard with respect to being a life coach. And Mike Koribanics, my friend here in New Jersey, who is a former assistant prosecutor in Hudson County. We served long-term together in that office. He is a certified New Jersey Supreme Court trial attorney. There's only 250 of those out of approximately 90,000 lawyers in the state of New Jersey. Impressive credential. And he is a law and crime analyst and a trial lawyer, like one of the best I've ever seen. Welcome to the show, guys. I want to go to you, Mike, first on this. We all know about the 5K cooperation. Our audience may want to know, okay, he pled guilty to conspiracy. He's willing to cooperate, but what's his sentence going to be? But you know what goes on there, Mike. There is no sentencing recommendation at this point in time. Educate our audience about what the feds do when you're on Team Fed, and how basically they extract as much as they can, have you fully cooperate, talk to them truthfully in order to get that coveted 5K cooperation letter.
Bob, I think the word you used, coveted, really explains it. And this is why, like you said before, this has nothing to do with what political stance you take. This is really happening, and this is vetted information. Bob, as you know, and I know Lisa could speak to this, to get a cooperation agreement with the federal government is like an audition. You have to go in there, and most of the time you go in there, the first meeting is to see, are you truthful? Can we corroborate the things you say? Once that occurs, you move on to the next step, where then they're going into information that they could corroborate and then further investigation. If he got this cooperation agreement, he was heavily vetted, especially if it was during and now he's pled. And as much information as he gives, he will get credit. And the more credit it is, the better his sentencing recommendation will be by the government, because they're in control, but the judge has the ultimate say here. And as long as he's truthful, Bob, and if I'm a co-defendant in this case, they should be very concerned, because it seems like he has a lot of information.
Well, Lisa, having been a former law enforcement officer and a military person, we all know the way this rolls. The first one who usually gets to the feds first to cooperate, and if they accept you, winds up probably getting the better deal. And every defense lawyer knows that's true. And in this particular instance, Ty is probably one of the more culpable people, one of the more responsible people. But because he got there first, and if he fully cooperates, there could be a scenario in which he winds up doing actually less time than those who even had lesser involvement. Talk to me a little bit, based on your undercover narcotics experience, how important it is for a law enforcement officer, I'm talking about the ones who put the cuffs on you, to get a witness like this so the prosecutors can leverage them to really basically obliterate the rest of the defendants.
It's the holy grail, working with informants for 3 years, working undercover, and having them actually come forward and give up everybody that's culpable, all of the co-conspirators. And we find out it is truthful through the evidence that we receive, the phone calls, the texts, the GPS, where they are. And I'm certain the federal government found that the involvement with Ty regarding his texts, what he did, where he showed up, was his GPS at the shoot house. Was he part of it? Because he said he never intended on going through with the plot. Were they able to prove that he was just a part and parcel to it? He wanted to jump on board with the other 5 co-conspirators, and he was less culpable. So that was probably why they made the agreement, because they felt that he was candid during the interviews and they had evidence to back it up.
Yeah, Lisa, just to follow up a little bit on that point, when he is there, they do make that assessment. But from an investigative point of view, when you're dealing with cooperating witnesses or confidential informants, it's imperative, because there could be all sorts of excuses, like the defense lawyer gave, like, oh, this is the bawdy talk. He really didn't mean it. He wasn't going to execute on any of it. But these things also corroborate the other informant information that they were given. So what are your thoughts about how important that is from a continuing investigation standpoint with regard to the other 5 defendants?
Yeah, it's true. And I think the other defense attorneys are probably sweating right now, because they don't know everything that came forward. So because he made this plea deal and we know the sentencing is coming forward, I think they're probably restructuring what their defense is going to be based on the knowledge the co-conspirators have of what Ty Garbin knew and what his role was in all of this. So I think they're going to reassess what they're going to do going forward with their case.
Yep, Mike, if we were the defense attorneys with the other 5, we would be having a strategy session, because to Lisa's point and your point, when Ty's given all that information, you are in deep trouble if you're one of those other co-defendants. Let's switch gears a little bit, guys. On the George Floyd case, dramatic developments and motions being filed by both sides with regard to the introduction of evidence. And we talk about this all the time, especially with regard to what evidence can be introduced and can't be introduced, because you just can't throw it all against the wall. There's an evidence book that allows things or doesn't. What we have basically right now is a scenario where a judge has made rulings that are probably going to be detrimental to the defendants. And remember, the defendants are the cops in the case, and they wanted certain instances of prior conduct excluded with regard to Officer Chauvin in particular. Then the judge is going to admit some of the previous instances. And with respect to the prosecution, the defense also wanted to have some of the victim in this case, George Floyd's previous history with police, to be released, including one incident in which he was basically acting in the same manner that had occurred on the day of the incident. Mike, let me go to you. This is very complex legal stuff, but it's very important. What gets admitted and what doesn't get admitted. What do you make of the judge's ruling? And I have to know for our audience, I wish I could tell you the basis for all of it. The judge ruled whether things could be admitted or not, but said his opinion with regard to why he ruled that way would come later. Mike?
Well, Bob, I think what's very important here is, as we both know, trials are very organic. Things change and are very contextual. Today's denial of evidence may be, during the trial, some other questions that come up give it a different context, and that evidence may be admissible. So as the attorneys who are seeking admission who are denied, you don't give up. I think the judge is trying to keep this case as clean as possible. I think the rulings of prior incidents are going to come in under 404B, and it's going to be very interesting, but I think they're going to take it one step at a time. But all these rulings can change once the trial starts.
Lisa, let me go to you on something from a tactical law enforcement point of view. One of the things that the prosecutors wanted to bring out, it's very interesting, is that there was a case where Chauvin was witnessing other officers' actions after they had tased a gentleman who was in a prone position, but they then put him in a side recovery position, and those officers actually got a commendation. The individual was trying to commit suicide, got a commendation that their actions by putting him on his side saved his life as opposed to being in the prone position. And the judge said he is going to allow that to be admitted against former officer Chauvin if the prosecutors can connect that Chauvin knew that the reason that man lived was because he was put in the recovery position. Talk to me about the tactics of the recovery position and what your thoughts are about the judge's ruling that if prosecutors can make the connection that Chauvin knew, prosecutors can use it to say he had prior knowledge of the importance of how to do this correctly.
Yes, they had to prove that he was there. And what I'd like to say about that is Chauvin actually came forward and said later, even though the officers were commended because of that life-saving procedure that they used, Chauvin is alleging that the paramedics said that if they had not gotten there sooner, that position would have actually have killed him. So now we have a contrast and a conflict. They received an award because of that position, but the position still wasn't good enough for them to achieve the result, and the woman could have expired based on that. They said you can't use that information unless they're able to prove that the paramedic actually told that information to Chauvin. So I think Chauvin is backpedaling and hoping that he's going to get some slack based on that information, but I don't see any way that he will be able to prove that. Tactically, putting your knee on somebody's neck who is prone and handcuffed doesn't make sense. Makes zero sense.
Wow, awesome stuff, guys. We got a lot on the plate today. The Green River Killer is back in the news. And you know why? Because Jane Doe, 14 years old, now has a name. We'll be right back. Well, there's loud protests and demonstrations that are going on outside of the courthouse with regard to this case and with Derek Chauvin in particular, as you see there in the George Floyd matter. And don't think that judges aren't listening to this. In fact, the judge basically has said that while the Derek Chauvin trial is up and running, he's suspending other trials, other non-related trials, because of their fear of safety and concern. It's a big issue. Mike, I want to go to you on this first. I mean, me and you have been involved in cases where maybe not to this intensity, but we've been involved where there's protests. And of course, you're always worried about its impact on jurors. That's number one. I mean, we believe in a fair system, fair fight in that courtroom, let it happen. But we are literally at a point right now where a judge is suspending trials because he's afraid that other jurors, other defendants, other prosecutors, and other defense lawyers, I would imagine, can somehow get caught up in this, and that those trials could be tainted and or dangerous. What do you think about the judge's ruling?
I'm not really thrilled with it, Bob, because I think as coming through this pandemic really sets it up. I understand his concerns, but other defendants have their rights as well to a speedy trial. And we've learned through the pandemic, and Bob, you know, we both are members of the New Jersey Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys who have been fighting for in-person trials, but the safety of everyone involved, and it's going to be difficult. I think what they need to do is find an alternate site to hold other trials and just have this trial held in one site, and that cures the problem. But they're going to be so backed up because of COVID on the cases where people are incarcerated. I think a lot of this is really just more for some sort of I don't know why they're thinking that, but they should think of an alternate location to have other trials to protect speedy trial rights.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great point. But, as you bring up too, there's COVID that's going on. All of the trial dockets are backed up. And so it's a question of where you move these chess pieces around. Lisa, there's only every county is jammed with trials waiting for people who have a right to a speedy trial. Some of those rights have been suspended during this pandemic. So I can imagine, having been the prosecutor and watching how judges react to this, saying, hey, wait a minute, I got enough here on my docket in my county. I'm not being taken over a bunch of cases from another county. So what do you think about the equities here? Should it be transferred over, like Mike said? Certainly a legitimate thought process there. Or should that county just suspend the trials, further delaying defendants and prosecutors and victims' rights to justice?
I also was trying to think of a solution to that, because you have to think about what the pulse is of the people who are in that vicinity, the people who want to come and continue protesting, and what their ulterior motive is. So what intel did the judge receive regarding what was going to happen when this trial actually starts? So you do need to pay attention and make sure that people are safe. Of course, they're going to have more police officers and more security there to make sure that that unfolds in a very safe way, as safe as you possibly can. Putting it in another venue, I think also we have the issue of those cases being backed up. If you're moving one courthouse to another courthouse, what happens to the ones at the other courthouse? So coming up with a viable solution that's going to get the speedy trial that everybody deserves in cases that are backed up is going to be difficult. I don't know how they would be able to do it to make it as fair as possible, but also keeping that courthouse as safe as possible and the other defendants and jurors.
Yeah, Mike, listen, we're always looking for fairness in the cases. And even as a prosecutor, you don't want to have an environment where you can get a conviction and it can later be reversed, which we see all the time. What extent do you think a judge can go to in order to preserve the protection of the people, as well as allow them to demonstrate, but not infect the outcome of the litigation itself? We're seeing this. We saw this with Weinstein. We're seeing this more and more, where people are outside screaming. Jurors are listening to it. Jurors may be frightened. And look, I want to get a conviction, but I want to get it the right way. I want to get it the fair way as a prosecutor.
Well, Bob, I don't want to be misunderstood. I wasn't talking about a change of venue. I was literally talking about how people have discussed going to it, having trials in empty warehouses where you can socially distance, where you could do everything and be protected from the elements outside. That's basically what a courthouse does. And all they need to do is move it to a neutral location. I'm sure the government has vacant buildings where they could do this and accommodate everything. That's what I think is the most common sense and doesn't affect any constitutional rights. Just a separate building away from other trials.
Mike Koribanics with an amazing suggestion, using a warehouse or other facility. We are learning to do more with less. That really is great, Mike. You should ring them up and give them that suggestion. Honestly, that is a way that we can modify it and make it fair for everybody. Great job, Mike. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, starting his killing spree back in 1982. By all estimations, the best we can approximate, there have been 49 murders that this man has committed. He pled guilty to most of them, but there were 4 women that remained unidentified. But due to some great forensics that were being done by police and anthropologists, one of those Jane Does is now no longer Jane Doe, but she is Wendy Stevens. Let's go to Anjanette Levy from the Law and Crime Network for a little brief description as to what's going on with this great discovery that Jane Doe now has a real name.
For decades, those remains were simply known as Bones 10, but DNA technology has finally identified her as Wendy Stevens.
For years, in the 1980s and 90s, the Green River Killer terrorized the Seattle area. The remains of young women and girls left in wooded areas around the river.
I was just a kid when this crime really first started impacting our community here. So I've seen it both growing up in Seattle, and it was seeing the work and how it was featured here was one of the things that motivated me to join the sheriff's office.
Kings County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Tim Meyer said the Green River Task Force worked tirelessly to find the murderer. Gary Ridgway was on their radar. But it wasn't until 2001 that DNA testing confirmed Ridgway was the killer. As part of a plea agreement, he confessed to murdering 49 girls and women and led detectives to more remains. The work of identifying victims wasn't over, including a set known only as Bones 10.
She was in our system known as Bones 10, and that was just a designator that was given for our investigators. All of our detectives, everyone at the medical examiner's office, they are not satisfied with it.
Yeah, a little bit of a video thing there, but we understand exactly what went on here. Lisa, you know, you've worked in these kind of investigations, and it is amazing to me, just to let the audience know, when I started trying homicide cases, and Mike knows this, when he was trying cases in Hudson County, DNA was just kind of coming out. And I usually had blood evidence cases, and I could not get, it was only Quantico you could go to, and I could not get them to do any DNA analysis. We had to try it old school by the use of circumstantial evidence. But today, the sophistication of this DNA is amazing. And Bones number 10 has now got a name, and the family has the peace of mind of knowing this. And the anthropologist, one of the anthropologists and the people that were involved in this was Dr. Catherine Taylor, who said, every person needs their name. I think that is so true. What do you think about the manner in which they went about this in Seattle, never letting it go, using top-level forensics in order to finally put a name to Bones number 10?
It's so incredibly groundbreaking, and we've been doing this for many years now. I know when I was a police officer, yes, we were doing DNA and going forward with that, but it took forever to get the results. So we have more of a rapid response right now. Genealogy, using these formats and these platforms to try and identify people who are associated and members of the family, that has been incredible in the last 3 years alone. We're able to solve cases that we've never been able to solve before based on finding family members and going forward with that. So I think it's amazing. One thing we do know with Gary Ridgway is he actually did admit to killing 71 people. So 49 that he was convicted for, but 71 people. So all those other ones that are at large, all the Jane Does that are across the nation in various places, I think this is going to give incentive to detectives to start opening up some more of these cold cases and submitting that DNA and information that they have for genealogy searches to be able to get closure to the family members who have missing persons still.
Yeah, no doubt. The development of the genealogy matches has really been extraordinary when people are giving their DNA to these various organizations and they're able to start to build a family tree, has led to a number of solving of cases, Mike, in the last couple of years. Mike, thoughts about the idea that when we were baby prosecutors, we didn't have social media, we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones with geospatial tracking abilities. And I can tell you that when I left, became a defense attorney for 12 years, and then when I got appointed to be the county prosecutor, I was like, oh my gosh, all the additional stuff that we have and tools at our disposal that are just amazing in terms of being able to solve and prove cases.
It is amazing. And you know, Bob, it cuts both ways. A lot of people just focus on DNA and saying, oh, convict, convict, convict. But the beautiful thing about DNA is many who were wrongly accused and wrongly convicted because of circumstantial evidence, things that really left reasonable doubt and things of that nature, have been solved, and people have obtained their freedom and they've tried to correct it. So DNA works both ways because, like we were taught as baby prosecutors, Bob, facts are very stubborn. They're difficult to move, and DNA is now becoming more of a fact science than any other process they have.
You know, Mike, you bring up a great point I want to follow up on. You know, when we were trained by our bosses in Hudson County, we were always told the guiding star was to do the right thing. It's not about securing convictions. It's about doing justice. Now, sometimes it's different things to different people, but at least our North Star was to do the right thing. Unfortunately, I can't say that philosophy or ethos permeated every office. And certainly I've seen that in my experience from years, as I went forward. But with regard to your point about DNA exonerating people, the fact of the matter is innocent people do get convicted of crimes. Yet, Mike, have you seen this stubbornness a little bit where there's controversial cases and prosecutors are still objecting to having the DNA matched? Like, if it were me on any case I ever prosecuted, and I prosecuted a lot of homicides and put people away for a long, long time, life sentences, I would want to make sure we got it right. I mean, I wanted the person convicted because I believe they did it, but I'm not omnipotent.
Bob, I couldn't agree more, but I always remember what we were taught back when we were young prosecutors and trying cases. We were taught, do the right thing and make sure your convictions stick. Make sure they stick. And Bob, the biggest thing is your reputation is all you really have as a prosecutor or a defense lawyer. So if you're not open to do fairness and you're just there to get convictions, to get headlines, you're in the wrong profession.
Yeah, Lisa, but what do you think about this idea? Like, I understand cop culture, you understand cop culture and prosecutor culture. Why is there this resistance to allowing people to use DNA that was recovered a long time ago and to take advantage of the very same things that law enforcement is allowed to do at the snap of their fingers or at any opportunity they want? Why do defense attorneys sometimes have to jump through hoops in your mind? Wouldn't the DNA show, if it's the person's DNA, wow, you not only got a conviction, but it was the right person? What do you think is going on there? Is it a tunnel vision? What's the mentality?
Unfortunately, I think it comes down to one thing, and I've said this before, John Wayne syndrome. The fact that I did it the right way the first time, and you can't come back and try to get it again and take it away from me. So there's a little bit of, I would have to say, some grandiosity and maybe some narcissism tied to that they don't want to go down by saying that their original case, there was a flaw, there was something wrong, there was something missing. So you're going to reveal the cards of that missing part, and it's personal. So unfortunately, not having the ethos, as you said, or the best moral compass going forward, we have police officers who have coerced confessions and gotten false confessions. And we know that, and that has come out. So that's why Project Innocence and programs such as that to try and find the real truth using DNA is the best format going forward with that. There's no question when you have that evidence.
All right, Seattle Seahawks, Chad Wheeler lost a career and is in deep trouble with regard to a domestic violence incident. I hope you stay tuned for this because we're going to have some great commentary about the scourge of domestic violence in the United States. We'll be right back. All right, I'm not a big football fan follower, nor am I with regard to the rap world and the music world, but we got two stories coming up about that. So my guests are going to help me out to explain the cultural significance of what we're dealing with. One of these is Seattle Seahawks, Chad Wheeler. He was arrested on suspicion of felony domestic violence. He's an offensive tackle. The victim is his girlfriend, or was his girlfriend, and he was released on a no-contact order for $400,000 bail, and he had to surrender all weapons. Police responded to the call and indicated that they heard the woman screaming from inside a bathroom and that the football player, the defendant, Mr. Wheeler, had asked her to bow to him, and when she didn't, threw her on a bed, assaulted her, told her that she was yelling that on 911, I'm going to be killed. The physical fight ensued. The woman was screaming, as I said, when they got there, and he grabbed her and then tried to strangle her. She passed out, according to the victim, and when she woke up, he looked at her and said, "Wow, you're still alive?" So this is obviously a very dramatic thing. Guys, I want to give you a statement that Chad Wheeler had sent out. He's been cut from the team, and he wrote, "Events happened over the weekend that transpired from a manic episode. I am deeply sorry for the pain and suffering that I've caused Aaliyah and her family. I apologize profusely for the turmoil that I've caused my family, teammates, fans, and those closest to me. The most important thing right now is that Aaliyah gets the care she needs and I get help. Both are happening. It is time for me to walk away from football and get the help I need to never again pose a threat to another. I cannot express my sorrow or remorse enough. I am truly ashamed." That was posted on Twitter. A very, Mike, as a defense lawyer, I want to go to you. Never want your clients making these statements, but, I really find this fascinating. As you know, my law practice right now does a lot of work with family law attorneys whose clients either get involved in domestic violence cases or are victims in domestic violence cases or have crimes charged in the domestic violence context, because we always used to say as prosecutors, today's domestic violence is tomorrow's homicide. So I think that this was actually a smart move, because one of the things that we try to do in our practice is that if you have committed or alleged you have committed an act of domestic violence, is to get help, to try to show prosecutors that you recognize, you accept responsibility, you're willing to accept the consequences. And what prosecutors want to know, Mike, is that you're not going to be back again doing something worse. What do you think about the move of putting this statement out there? You know the lawyer had to have some involvement in that.
Bob, I think it was a brilliant move. It was a brilliant move from a defense. And this is not to take anything away or detract or distract from the victim. She is at the center of this. But the very fact, Bob, as defense attorneys, sometimes we know there are cases that are just not winnable. And if this is sincere, I think this was a very good move. And I also like the fact that he focused more on the victim than himself, mentioned her first, wished her the best, but admitted that he has a mental problem that needs to be addressed. And we are in the middle of a pandemic now. We've seen the failure of mental health for all people who are developing. Imagine if you had it at the beginning, how much this could aggravate it. I think this was a good move, and I hope he gets the help, and she is safe.
Lisa Lockwood, the pandemic has certainly exacerbated situations, particularly for women. Not that men are not victims of domestic violence, but on top of the cycle of violence that we see in domestic violence cases, these victims feel even more isolated because their abusers are many times, because of the pandemic, locked in. They're afraid to email. They're afraid to avail themselves of services. But I want to know what your opinion is about, at least my philosophy, that we all have the ability to be able to help in this situation. That includes even those who defend people who are accused of domestic violence, because that lawyer has an opportunity to be able to get services and help to that person as a way both to help them in their case, but to help them as a person to ensure it doesn't happen again. This needs to be done like, you know, a village, as they say, right? Everybody needs to be involved. Lisa, what's your perspective? Because I know from having read your website that you are very familiar with the cycle of abuse.
I am, Bob. And I had been a victim, and I'm also a survivor of domestic violence before I was a police officer. And I know without a doubt that he had probably exhibited some kind of behavior prior to this manic episode. So he probably had some untreated mental health issues. And then it got to the point where he did go ahead and have this mental breakdown. Making the demands of bow to me, that doesn't make any sense in any capacity, in any form, that he would have her do that. What would be the reason for that? Where was his mind in that moment? And then to go ahead and strangle her, to have her pass out, actually think she's dead. And it's unfortunate when she wakes up, and then the beating continues to more dislocation of the shoulder. She was bleeding when the police officers arrived. This is so important. Right now, everybody who has been locked up, there have been domestic cases. It has been on the increase. And a lot of people fail to report because they're concerned, they're fearful that their partner is going to do something even worse. So they're in a position right now where their security is just not there. So bringing this to light, having this blasted on multiple streams in every capacity and platforms to let people know that, yes, there are people out there who are having mental breakdowns. There are victims of domestic violence as we speak. And hopefully these women and some men, as you said, because they are victims, come forward and they actually get help for these people and get help for themselves.
Yeah, and I never forget one of the most compelling lectures I heard when I was prosecutor was from a woman who talked about domestic violence in high socioeconomic groups and well-educated, whether famous or popular, and that they're even less likely to seek services because of the reputational damage that can be done to them. It's really an unbelievable thing. And if you or anyone you know is a victim of domestic violence, there are all sorts of resources and agencies that can help. And please reach out to them and at least become educated. So we're going to switch gears now to Tori, the Love Lanes, and Megan, the Stallion. Mike Koribanics, I know that you know all things in the pop culture world. I must say that I am not as well-heeled as you are in that area. Tell us what this is about, because Tori is saying, I've been gagged by the court with regard to a case he's involved in, and I want that gag lifted so I can speak. What's going on, Mike?
Well, Bob, I have a very reliable source. I had to contact my son to have him explain a little bit more of this case to me as far as who was who. This case is interesting, and I don't agree with his attorney in this matter. Bob, you know, like I always tell people when they come in, if I have a client who's famous out there in the press, I always make it very clear. I am your criminal defense lawyer. I'm not your public relations manager. I'm not here to help you, you know, sell more records or make sure that you stay out in the public. Right now, I think this court order gagging the defendant so he doesn't respond to Twitter and things of that nature can only help him. Bob, as we've gotten older and I've been doing this, both of us, over 28 years now, is the very fact that social media never, in my experience, helps defendants. It always puts them in admissions against their own interest and hurts them at trial. I don't think they should be touching this gag order at all.
Mike Koribanics knows a lot about pop culture. He knows a lot about law, but 28 years. Okay, Mike, if that's what you want, if that's how you want to call it, I think it could be a couple more years than that, my friend.
I didn't
And
count
Lisa,
my clerkship. I didn't count my clerkship.
all right, Lisa, you know, what do you, here's the thing that I think, I know what Mike is saying, and being in the media never helps, but the argument is that if the other side gets to be in the media and gets to drive the dialogue and the conversation, to me, it should be a gag order all the way around, if that's possible. But what do you do when you're confronting one side being speaking and poisoning the public opinion and potentially jurors or judges or people that are going to be evaluating a case? You just lay there and just keep taking it?
It's true. Megan Thee Stallion has been nonstop talking about him shooting her and what he did, and he's lying the whole way. So she's building up this incredible following of supporters who are on her side when this case hasn't even gone to trial yet. But one thing that we do know, as far as the evidence, the police officers were able to see text messages of him apologizing to her for having shot her, even though publicly he is denying that it ever happened, that he didn't shoot her, and she's got 2 bullet holes in one of her feet. And when the police pulled him over in the SUV that she was trying to escape from, they see her bleeding from her foot. So, I mean, evidence is there. We'll see how this shows up in court. I don't know what kind of defense he's going to have based on that, but I would agree. I think a gag order, both sides, that she should have been told to just zip it and let this thing play out in a court of law.
Excellent. Okay, guys, listen, you know this is going to happen. I actually talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the COVID-19 vaccine, where I'm going to say debacle, not just with the delivery systems and everything else that's going wrong, but you are going to find a black market of people that are going to be doing nefarious things. We're going to be talking about law enforcement as well as EMS personnel. They're in some hot water for having stolen vaccine. We'll talk about that on the other end of the break. All right, well, here we go. In Polk County, Florida, paramedic of the year, quote unquote, and a fire rescue captain are accused of theft of the COVID-19 vaccine after an investigation of all bollocks, paperwork, and all sorts of things of that nature occurred. And it was determined, at least allegedly, that these individuals were taking that stuff for their own personal use for their families. Let's go to a press conference where they announced the charges as to what occurred here.
He confessed. He said, I made all that up. I made up the one real victim, and I made up the other 2 names. I made up the email stuff that I sent. It was all fraudulent. It was wrong. We go, why would you do that? He said, well, he said, there's this captain, and I give you the captain's name because he's under criminal investigation. He would be arrested today, but he's on his way back from out west. He will be arrested upon his arrival here. There's a captain at the fire department called Tony Diamano. And Tony supposedly went to Joshua Cologne and said, you know, I'd like some vaccine for my mother. And Joshua Cologne rebuffed him, said, no, I can't do that. So he made several requests of this vaccine from the paramedic. And the captain was told, I can't do that. So what occurred was there were 3 syringes with 3 doses of the vaccine that Joshua Cologne put in a plastic bag, put in a special refrigerator, and sealed it. And then at the direction of the captain, he took a break. So he left, take a break, and when he came back, voila, the seal's broken and the vaccinations are gone.
Lisa, talk to me about the law enforcement culture. I mean, I was an EMT for many years. I worked as the chief law enforcement officer of a county. I think I know what your answer is going to be. This to me is a big deal. Why do you think that they get themselves involved in this? Is this entitlement and arrogance that they think they can get away with it and then lie about it?
Yes, the temptation is there every single day to do something illegal when performing search warrants, coming into large amounts of money, weapons, drugs, etc., for dirty cops to go ahead and take that opportunity. In this case, EMS workers. What's different about this case is the mindset around this is to save a family member. This is something that I want to get in line first to save a family member. So it's an altruistic kind of reasoning. However, you're breaking the law. You're putting yourself in front of another deserving person, and there's a way that this is all being rolled out. So what's happening here is that particular case of him saying he wants it for his mother and whoever else the other two vaccination vials were going to go to, and then threatened him to say, I know that you're selling them. So if you don't do this, I can dangle that over your head to get you arrested. So out of the 30 vials, 21 were legitimately administered to the people who were in line and lined up the proper way. 3 of them we know went to this fire captain. So that means we have 6 that were at large. What happened to those other 6 that Cologne is now admitting to having at least 3 that he fudged paperwork for? Did he actually sell them?
Lisa, did you find it a little odd that that captain has now been arrested? Okay, so he is under arrest, but did you find it odd that while the captain is traveling, when we're always worried about flight risks and the fact that he's an officer, so he's armed, that this press conference is going on basically saying, we're coming for you? I just thought that was a little strange.
Right. Right. And they needed to do the press conference. I mean, you have to get out there and expose what you have and show your cards to the public. But to say that, I think they looked at him potentially as somebody who, prior to this incident, would never do anything like this. His job is to save lives. So yeah, it's kind of difficult in that situation when you have somebody who has been revered for a very long time in that position, and then also you have to do the right thing and arrest him and find out where he is and say, stop where you are, and get him back home the proper way, which is in handcuffs.
It shocks me from every tactical thing I've ever seen. Everything I think put the officers in danger. You can do the press conference and talk about it afterwards once the captain is arrested and safely secured. Mike Koribanics, how are prosecutors going to view this? I mean, as Lisa says, there could be a quote unquote altruistic reason. I could tell you how this prosecutor would have handled it. I would have gone full board on these people because I want to send a very strong message that this will not be tolerated and you will go to jail. Is there any mitigating factors here? You're a great defense lawyer. What's your position if you're representing these guys?
Well, first of all, I think you're in like lawyers, everybody has ethics in their professional field. This is no different. They're entrusted to protect and make sure this vaccine is properly administered. I think it's very dangerous. As a defense attorney, I think you have to speak about the altruistic motives if they exist. Because we've got missing doses and things of that nature. I just think the press conference, it was more important for that sheriff to get out to everyone, to remind them that this is not a free-for-all. This vaccine is very important, and you have to maintain a dignity and your ethical obligations. The only thing is, that is one of the best press conferences and most dramatic press conferences I've ever seen by law enforcement. I think he was given an opening statement, quite frankly.
Yeah, I know. What do you think, Mike, though, real quick, about the idea that he's basically telegraphing in that press conference that we're going to be arresting this captain who is armed, it has a flight potential? Just your thoughts about, did that put the other officers in a tactical disadvantaged position?
I don't think so, Bob. I think pretty much he has an attorney. They were contacted. I've had many situations where people were out of the country flying in where I have negotiated the surrender. So I don't find it to be that. I don't find it to be that problematic.
Okay, guys. Well, listen, it's always great to have your guys' perspectives. You got two pros here. And I want to thank everyone at the Law&Crime Network for all the great work they do, especially those folks in the control room. My name is you can find me at Bianchi ESQ. Please stay tuned for our regularly scheduled program. I'll be back next week.